powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios, it's Football at 4.
Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast with Jeff Mosher and this man, Adam Caplan, who joins us for Happy Hour Friday edition of Football at 4. We're live at the 40th Annual Ranch Hope Golf Classic. It's centered in Golf Club in Pittsgrove, New Jersey, and it's been a great event. Everybody's kind of halfway through the event here. Great sponsors, great day. They're having a dinner tonight, awards and all sorts of stuff. Great sponsors throughout the day stopping by to say hello, and people waiting around to hear this man, Adam Caplan, Football at 4. Everybody loves the Football at 4. What's going on, Adam Caplan? How are you?
Well, Mike, could you get me one of those polo shirts? I could see it here on YouTube.
Yeah, man. You know me. I'm king of the polo. I had the 3/4 zip with me today, but it's too warm out here. Oh, dude,
come on. You got to hook us up with one of those. Come on.
I could get you one of these things. All right,
I'll advertise it, man. For friends at Sky Motor Cars, I wear their 3/4 zip. But it's kind of an interesting note. The Eagles dumped this on Friday, and I love it because I'm Mr. Joint Practice. Yeah, the Eagles are going to have another set of joint practices. I was not expecting that. That's cool. I love it. It's good.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about how these things work and how it all came into fruition here. It looked like just announced a little while ago that the Eagles and the Colts are going to have a joint practice. And obviously Sirianni has ties with the Colts. I think they're playing in the preseason too.
Yeah, so almost always, Mike, with rare exception, teams practice with each other leading up to their preseason games. So the way it's going to work, just like the Eagles will do the week before, also at home versus the Browns, and both games are on a Thursday night. So what they most likely will do, it's almost always like this. They'll practice probably that Monday and Tuesday. Both teams will have their walkthrough on Wednesday where they don't work with each other. They'll have the walkthrough. Then they'll play that Thursday night. Now, because remember now, we don't have 4 preseason games anymore. We have 3. These games are interesting because, as we learned last season, for the preseason games, we'll talk about the joint practice in a second, not every team looks at like the 3rd preseason game as the dress rehearsal. Some do the 2nd game, Mike. That could be for the Browns when they come in. And the other thing now, as we bring in the joint practice discussion, I noticed on my tour last year, because this was again, with the shortened preseason, some teams are just basically taking the joint practices as a dress rehearsal and not the preseason game. So that's really what's happened here over the last couple seasons.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I know you got the old school guys who think, these preseason games, you got to have that good drive. I want to see a good drive. These teams value these joint practices almost more because in a preseason game, you may never get that 3rd and 1 situation, or you may never get that 3rd down and 10 where you want to run that play. In the joint practice, you can run 3rd and 10 straight plays.
Right. So what happens is, on what you just said, you send a script in, you give a script to the other coach's staff. Hey, guys, this is what we want to work on. The other staff gives you that script. And that's just as he said. It's interesting that you brought that up. That's actually how the practice is run. It's what you feel like you want to work on. Now, there's a really intrinsic benefit to this. Because you're going to work not with them just once but twice, you got the joint practices, the 2 practices actually, and then, barring something unforeseen, it'll be 2. It's rare that it's 1, but it should be 2. And then the preseason game, you've got so much tape from these guys. So what happens is you start looking at the bottom 10 of their roster, which you project by your own study of the roster. Then, by the way, Rick Spielman told us this, the former Vikings GM, for our Patreon subscribers earlier this week. What they do is they exchange notes with the opponent that week. Hey, which guys are fringe guys that maybe we have maybe we could work something out. Some teams do make trades coming down to the initial 53 in early September. When those there are only usually a couple trades, but they will exchange notes. So these are really important, particularly so now, because you have one less preseason game, and Mike, we know this. Veterans don't practice very much in training camp, so these joint practices are very important. And sometimes, to be honest with you, they're longer than the normal practices. I mean, I remember one of the 2 years that Sirianni's been here, There was one training camp practice was 45 minutes. I couldn't believe it. I've never seen anything like that.
Yeah, real quick before we get to some of the questions, like the Eagles are allowed to have 13 of these. They choose to have less. Do they just not value the field work? Do they do more classroom work? Why do you think they've elected to only do a minimum amount of these?
Well, it's interesting. The maximum under the CBA is 13.
Right.
What I don't quite understand is, okay, so here's the way it was explained to me. And this happened in the first year. So Sirianni and the Eagles Players Council, whoever is apprised of it, they had an agreement that they would shorten it up. But our understanding was, okay, well, this means everybody's going to show up. I know there's been some reporting about some people who were not spotted. Now, I don't know, were they working out indoors? Were they weightlifting? I have no idea. So I don't want to say someone was not in the complex. But I still don't understand, though, why not unless it's injury, why wouldn't you be on the field doing something? I don't quite understand that part of it. But I do know this. Sirianni he wasn't real descriptive, but he did confirm he had an agreement with the Players Council, the Eagles Players Council, whoever that is. Remember, Doug Peterson had that as well. This is typical around the National Football League. But I don't know why just 6. It is. It's not the way that every team does it. The Bengals only have 6 practices. But now here's the difference. They do have 3 days of mandatory that the guys have to show up no matter what. That's the difference.
Especially if you have 2 new coordinators and you do have one on the offensive side of the ball. You would think these coordinators would want to get their guys out there. So let's start with the offense and the new coordinator, Brian Johnson. How much will this offense change in your mind with Brian Johnson?
All right, let's address this because I know there's been a lot of speculation really with both coordinators, Mike, what's going to change. And in our reporting on Jonathan Gannon when he came in, what we had said is they really want to run the mirror match system, which they had run heavily last year, match, carry, and deliver. But he didn't think he could do it quite the way that he wanted to, based on the personnel that he had. Year 2, he certainly had better personnel. But on offense, there really should be no slowing down of what they want. They're only going to have 1 new offensive lineman. They're going to have a new starting running back, whoever that may be. We're going to get into that in a second. But the offense is going to be relatively the same. It's just a different play caller. Now, not everybody, obviously. Brian Johnson will have his spin on this scheme and how he wants to call the game. But the scheme is the same. That's not changing. It's how he calls it, which is going to be different. And that's the interesting thing here. Now, the one thing we've talked about on Inside the Birds is, particularly lately, and when it comes to running back, whoever is going to be on the field at a particular time, will the running backs be more involved in the pass game? Because the Eagles running backs overall are in the bottom 10 of receptions. As part of it because Hurts doesn't want to check down. That's part of it. But maybe we need to see more design passes to the running backs, Mike. That could be a change here with Brian Johnson.
Yeah, I definitely, people talk about, the running backs not catching the ball, and it's like, hey, well, Hurts takes off and runs, and he gets 15 yards.
Sure.
Instead of just dumping it off, he runs. So we'll see if that's the good point you make there, Adam. Will they have more designed throws to their running back? Let's go to the running back. What does that position, shake out to be? I've seen some people talking about Penny at these OTAs, and he just looks like a big man back there.
Yeah, he is interesting. He's 5'11" in that area. We're going to find out how much he weighs. He definitely looks like a fullback, though. He's in terms of build. I know when the Seahawks drafted him, he was 235, which is obviously way too heavy. But he has got incredible juice. He's no offense to Gainwell or Sermon or DeAndre Swift. This guy's got amazing jets for a guy his size in particular. And then you've got DeAndre Swift, who's a little shifty. I'm fully expecting to be a 2-man backfield with Gainwell mixed in, Boston Scott mixed in. But when we get to September, which is really all that matters, if everybody's healthy, Penny and Swift included because they're chief among them, those are the 2 guys who are going to touch the football the most. But then the question is, okay, well, what's the split going to be? That'll work itself out in training camp. Now, Swift, if they have a designated 3rd down back, figures to be that guy. Maybe Gainwell gets some of that, but Swift, he's really good as a pass catcher, Mike. He's exceptional. It's just the injury history is what frustrated the Lions. He was not dependable, but he's really gifted in that area. He's got great vision. And we know Gainwell didn't have a great training camp, was in and out with a role until late last season where was he a third down back? Yeah, but they didn't give him the football until really late in the season where he looked really good. But the fact that they traded for Swift tells you that Swift's going to have a heavy role there, and they're going to have to figure this out with Gainwell. Now, could Gainwell cut into Swift's role, which I'm projecting? Yeah. He could. Yeah. He could, but he's going to have to prove it.
Would you say, I know it's June 2nd, but do you like the possibilities of this backfield better than the Miles Sanders-led backfield?
Yeah, and I was asked that in an interview this week, and I'm going to answer it this way, a little bit differently. Rashad Penny, and no offense to Miles Sanders. Miles Sanders is a really good back, and he signed for $6 million a year with the Panthers. Miles Sanders cannot do what Rashad Penny did 2 years ago with the Seahawks, where he led the NFL in rushing for like 5 weeks. He was unbelievable on a toss, sweep, getting downfield. Guys like him, that big, don't move. Like, it's just really, he's got rare. The reason why he was a first-round pick, and Pete Carroll more or less made that call back in 2018, he's just got rare ability for a guy his size. I'm talking about weight. No, I'm sure he's not 230. He's got to be in the 220s now, but he's better built, Mike. He's built his body up. I would think, Mike, when you look at this situation, Penny's got a chance to be the guy on first or second down more than Swift. That's probably the way I would look at that part.
All right, so with the personnel they have, these running backs, you got Goddard, not a lot of depth at tight end per se. I know Clay Harbor likes Dan Arnold a lot as a tight end there. What kind of groupings do we see this team? 11, 12?
Yeah, that's a huge question, and it's, again, June 2nd. Last year, Quez Watkins obviously was a disappointment. They didn't really have a fourth receiver. They weren't willing to use Britton Covey as a slot receiver, which was disappointing because one of the reasons why we said coming up OTAs last year that Britton Covey's the guy who's probably going to make the team, backup slot and punt returner. Well, they never used him as a slot receiver. I didn't understand that. Quez Watkins, Mike, I know they tried him as that guy. He's really not. He runs, look, we know he's fast. He doesn't have great hands. So Olamide Zaccheaus will be their 3. But the good thing here now is with Zaccheaus, who's a dependable 3, they'll have the ability to go 12 when they want to with Goddard and Jack Stoll or Grant Calcaterra. But Calcaterra doesn't block well enough yet. Dan Arnold is a slot tight end who was a receiver in college who should push Calcaterra. But they've got the ability to mix and match. And don't forget about Tyree Jackson, who's healthy, who's a big guy at 6'7", who's built his body up. He's finally healthy. So they'll have the ability, Mike, to flip from going 11, 3 receivers and 1 tight end to 12 personnel with 2 tight ends and 2 receivers. That's the good thing because they got better depth at both positions.
So maybe a more versatile looking offense here. Adam Caplan, Football at 4, Inside the Birds podcast, InsideTheBirds.com. Let's go to defense, man. And obviously John Gannon and many coordinators like a defensive line rotation. They like to keep those guys fresh. So will that be Sean Desai's philosophy with the groupings that he has?
I don't think there's any question he has to do that. He has to do the latter because you've got, and they typically start with a 3D tackle alignment. That's every game they started. The first play of the game was that. No matter who they had, it was like Cox last year, Hargrave, and then you saw Joseph or Sue later in the season. Jordan Davis, when he was healthy, was technically starting in that alignment, but he obviously didn't. Starting only means who's there for the first play. That's technically what it means, but it's all about snap counts. So there are 34 front. That's not going to change with 2 overhangs, but the way they deploy it, they've got Cox, Carter, Davis, Milt Williams, and my money will be on Kentavious Street, who I really like, who's an underrated player. I know in our initial 53, I had Ojomo as a 60 tackle. It's hard to keep 6. It's just hard. But you've got that rotation, which has the potential if everybody's healthy. If Davis continues to be in shape, which we put out 2 months ago, they were really happy with the way he showed up to their offseason program. In fact, he was really working out there, so they knew it. And then Jalen Carter, everything we've heard so far is good, which flushed with Cox and Milt Williams, who's been a good story for them, Mike. That rotation set. Now, the edge rushers, now when they go to they do play some 43 with Graham, with Sweat. Derek Barnett's back. They've got those guys. They need one more guy. Now, whether that's Janoris Robinson or Milton Williams is at fourth end because he's played it remains to be seen. But on your point, Mike, they have the potential to have a very deep rotation on the defensive line.
Great. And you look at an opportunity for someone to move up in that rotation, too. I mean, is there a kind of a maybe dark horse here?
That guy would be Janoris Robinson. I know when they signed him off the Vikings practice squad, they knew he wasn't going to contribute. Then he got hurt. But what they want to do is get him to the offseason because he is long at 6'5", long arms. I talked to someone who's familiar with the player, said he's a perfect developmental player. You'd rather him be on your practice squad to develop where there's no pressure. Now he's on the 90-man roster. They're going to take a look at him in these practices, also in training camp. And remember, with BG, obviously he's on a 1-year deal. Derek Barnett's on the last year is a 2-year deal. He has a real shot if he blows it up in training camp, Mike. That's one of the sleepers that we'll be looking for in training camp.
All right, let's look at the defensive secondary here with Adam Caplan because the back end of the defense is depth a concern. We know that they got a lot of safeties. I mean, a lot of corners on this team. There's a lot of safeties, I guess, but can any of them play?
That's the question. See, depth is not how many guys you have. It's how many guys that you feel good about. So I would think these 6 practices, I know it's not a lot, but they'll have those 6 practices and the tape to go through. And that'll largely contribute to whether they sign another veteran by the start of training camp in late July. Because, look, Zach McPherson, he could play the slot. He could play outside. He's an okay player. He hasn't had to play a lot because the 2 starting corners have not been hurt. That's a good thing. Greedy Williams is there. He had a big injury history with Cleveland. But he's long. I know that Charles Walls, who's one of their personnel directors, was with him in Cleveland. But Williams is on IR, Mike, twice.
Yeah.
You worry about that. He was on IR last season and also in 2020. He's a pretty gifted kid. He's got a new lease on life here with the Eagles. He's got the inside track to be the 3rd outside corner. Zach McPherson would be the 4th and probably the backup slot. I think he would have the edge for that. And plus, he's a good special teams player. The good thing is here, Mike, because nothing's really totally set with these backup jobs. Eli Ricks, Mekhi Garner, Josh Jobe, Mario Goodrich, Tristan McCollum's another guy that we'll talk more about when we get down the line here, who I like. I think he's got some really interesting gifts. He's tall, pretty smart kid. He doesn't have like the great body for safety. He's got corner length, but he's a guy I know they're going to take a deep look at here in OTAs.
If one of these corners, a Greedy Williams or a McPherson, could play the slot and they felt comfortable, would they look at Maddox as a safety, or do they like him so much as that slot that would not be considered?
Well, Maddox, remember, has played safety.
Yeah.
When Jim Schwartz moved him against Tennessee many years ago, if you remember, we were trying to figure out who is it going to be, and they kept it under wraps, and it shocked us. It was Avonte Maddox because he's so smart. He picked it up, and he wasn't terrible at it. I mean, he obviously he's a good athlete. He's a smart guy, and he can move. But no, they had an opportunity to do this last year when Gardner Johnson got hurt, and they stuck in. They moved in Reed Blankenship, but Blankenship really, Mike, is the 3. The way it's explained to me is he's not a good enough foot athlete to be a starting safety in the National Football League. He's a guy who'll get you through a tough spot in 3 or 4 games, but if you're asking for 17 games plus playoffs, it's just not the way you want to go.
All right, football at 4. Adam Caplan, OTAs continue next week. They'll have a couple of days. I think there's 1 day off in there for their OTAs. And, of course, you can check out the Inside the Birds podcast with Adam and Jeff and Football at 4 all season long and the off season here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. Adam, appreciate it, man.
See ya. Thank you.